Shalom, family. This is Initiation into Yoga, Chapter 2, Symbolism and Knowledge. All over the world and in all ages, there has been a tradition of a wonderful hidden knowledge and of a secret path that led to that knowledge. In ancient India, young men in hundreds cut themselves adrift from home ties and from the claims of orthodox religion to wander in forests and among inaccessible mountains in search of it. In Greece and Egypt, men sought it through initiation into the mysteries, and even during the ages when the Roman Catholic Church held well nigh undisputed sway in Europe, there were men, and even organized bodies of men, who, under the guise of the alchemical researches, pursued the same quest. And then there was a chivalric quest for the Holy Grail, a genuine fragment of an ancient pre-Christian initiatory tradition, though the Church found it expedient superficiality to Christianize the symbols and then to take it under its wing. Even among what are called primitive tribes, to this day, there are mystic initiations and men who lay aside bow and spear and all that savage standards hold worth living for to pursue a quest which they are scarcely able to formulate. Sir James Frazer reports secret societies in Africa whose members are resurrected after a magic sleep. Their members are taught the rudiments of a secret language, and in one, at least the initiates are known as Nganga, the knowing ones. Anthropologists and psychologists think they know all about these initiations, and pretty small beer they make of them. All one can do is say to with the job. Doubtless ye are the people, and wisdom shall surely die with ye, but we also have understanding. It is simply not true that Osiris is a vegetation or Apollo a solar myth. Rather, if we must talk like this, we should say that vegetation is an Osiris myth and the sun a myth of Apollo, since Apollo and Osiris and all such names refer to facts of higher order than those with which physical scientists deal. Just because of this, it is impossible that physical science should ever lay hold of them. The meshes of its net are so coarse that nothing but physical facts can be caught in them. The superphysical facts to which these and other similar names referred have been symbolized in a variety of ways, chiefly by those great natural processes which are fitting symbols, just because they are physical manifestations of the same inner process to which the symbols refer. But no mistake could be greater than to take the symbols, corn, phallus, sun, and whatnot, as we perceive them, for the things symbolized. It is not intended here to unveil the content of the mysteries, even if it were possible to do so. The initiated. The knowing exists, and those who seek it rightly and with perfect sincerity find out its existence for themselves. Science sets out to give a coherent account of such aspects of the universe as are presented at this particular epoch to our physical senses, and with such an account we can have no quarrel. But when scientists put forward an explicit or implicit claim that such knowledge is the only real knowledge, that the world of the physical senses is the only real world, we can only say that it is false, and that their world is the outermost skin of reality. Nor can we agree to the physicist's idea that the world of sense, with all its colors, sounds, and tastes, is a mere appearance of a gray world of colorless, tasteless, soundless, featureless matter, and still less with the view that reality is a set of mathematical equations, a complex of formal structures. To the exponents of this last view, we must ask, structures of what? Equations about what? There can be no equations devoid of content, and to think that there can be is to be guilty of what Whitehead terms the false fallacy of vacuous actuality. We must always remember that, as he says, apart from the experiences of subjects, there is nothing, nothing, bare nothingness. We have spoken of a hidden knowledge, and the question naturally arises as to where that knowledge is to be found. Is it to be sought for in books or records, either known to us or hidden, secret libraries away from the eyes of common men? It is certainly true that attempts have been made to express it in writing and in other media, in writings which are accessible to all men, as well as in writings that are not accessible or inaccessible. Such books are not the knowledge, cannot in themselves impart the knowledge, and in a sense do not even contain it. They can only help to lead us to the knowledge. It may even be said that until we have at least some portion of the knowledge, we cannot understand the books. Perhaps an illustration from the field of art will be of use. Beauty exists, and artists perceive it, see it, they are compelled to try and express it. Nevertheless, no work of art can give final expression to it. Always the artist must be continuing his efforts, never resting content with his results. Neither can he impart that beauty to others except it is so far as they themselves are, or are potentially, awake to its perception. So it is with the knowledge. Only he in whose heart it shoots, are already sprouting, can read the book which expresses it, for they are all written in the cipher, a cipher which is the more difficult to read because it has all the outward appearance of being written in our own language. A moment's thought will suffice to show that this must be so. All the book in the world fundamentally refer to data derived from physical sense experience, and if they are to express those far greater aspects of reality that are beyond the level of the senses, it can only be by symbolism that they can do so. This is as true of books that employ as an abstract philosophical symbolism as it is in those that luxuriate in the tropical forest of what everyone recognizes as symbols. Hence, it follows that those modern thinkers who attempt to reach truth by tying words down to their meanings in and for sense experience by stripping them of the felt aura which surrounds their clear reference, and however useful such a procedure may be in certain limited fields, are going in the opposite direction to that which leads to the knowledge. This knowledge, says Plato, is not a matter that can be transmitted in writing with other sciences. It requires long continued intercourse between pupil and teacher in joint pursuit of the object they are seeking to apprehend, and then suddenly, just as light flashes forth when a fire is kindled. Okay, that's interesting. This knowledge is born in the soul and henceforth nourishes it. But I do not think in public inquiry, as it is called. into these ultimate matters would be of any benefit except to a very few, and these are men who would be able, with a little explanation, to discover the truth for themselves. The knowledge exists in the only place where knowledge can exist, namely in that which is the knower. Within the unsounded deeps of man's being is all knowledge, for within him is hidden that power which has brought all this universe into manifestation. For the same reason, it is within all that exists, and not in man alone. The minute is center of life, the amoeba, if you like, or the smallest unit, or so called inorganic matter, is the manifestation of that same power, and within it is the knowledge in all its fullness. If it be true, as Eddington has said, that a single electron occupies the whole space, the whole of space, it is only true because there is that in the electron which knows the whole space, of which all is multitude multitudinous, all right, that's a word. Contents. Nevertheless, in saying this, we must not think that the knowledge is consciously present to these tiny atoms of life, nor to even the great majority of those bigger units that we call men. We know from our own experiences that what is actually and overly known to us in the sunshine of normal waking consciousness is very little indeed. We do not know whatever astronomers may believe the constitution of the stars. We do not know what happens to the psyche after the death of the body. We do not know even what is taking place in the next room. In our ordinary consciousness, in fact, we know so little that it is almost nothing. And yet, it is only because all knowledge is within us that we are able to play our parts in the universe with all its stars and lives and rooms. Everything in the cosmos is linked to everything else in a wonderful network of relations. And that means that everything knows, or as Whitehead puts it, prehends everything else. For, in the last analysis, there is no meaning in what philosophers term relations except as an act of knowledge. If it is true, and it certainly is, that my body is related to that of the star known as Sirius, it is because and only because there is that in me which knows Sirius, and that in Sirius which knows me. All this, okay. So, start here is Plato's seventh epistle. That's Marl's translation. Some critics have doubted the genuineness of these epistles, though others, equally scholarly, accept them. Someone wrote these words: "It may have been Jack the Giant Killer for all I care," and they are the truth. Okay. We are all familiar with philosophical writers who propound theories of a truly wonderful sort. Some of us were fascinated by those theories when we first heard them. When Berkeley told us that so-called material things were in reality ideas in the mind of God. When Hegel told us that the real was the rational and that the only true reality was the absolute idea, or when Bergson championed intuition as the source of real knowledge, we naively supposed that these eminent writers meant that they said and had something more important to impart to us. We thought that if we mastered the difficulties of their thoughts, we should really learn something that we had not known before. should expand our consciousness and see the universe in ways quite different from those familiar to us. Disappointment was in store for us. We soon found that the philosophers were not talking of any experience that they had, or even they had hoped to have. This table, said my philosophy professor one day to me, is really a colony of souls, bound together into a community by love. It was wonderful. It was thrilling. But when we wanted to learn more about those souls, to learn how we could know and enter into communion with those of our fellow men, we were led off again into the labyrinth of words and found that we were not to be vouchsafed any more in intimate experiences of the table than falls to the lot of any diner off it, nor if power was our aim. Were we to gain any power of manipulation over it that was not possessed by the merest carpenter of chemists? The table, in fact, remains that it always had been something to eat one's dinner on, and gradually some of us came to realize that all it was to the professor himself, and that in truth the whole soaring structure of his idealism was just an edifice of words, a verbal tower of Babel. We read Bradley and learn that time was riddled with contradictions and caught not be said to have real existence. It was mere appearance, and behind it somewhere was reality. But where was the reality, and how were we to establish ourselves in it? Did Bradley know anything real of it himself? It seemed that the question was thought a little vulgar. It was as if one had mentioned an apparent at the drawing room tea table. It was all very disappointing. The thrilling words meant nothing at all. Plato had said something had said somewhere that a thing's existence was its power to act. These systems of philosophy, did they have any power to act? Could they help one to gain control over the outer world of nature? Oh no. We were politely and a little scornfully referred to science. Could they help us to master the inner world of our souls? Do oh dear no. That was the province of religion. What they what then could they do? Nothing at all. It seemed except develop a skill in verbal dialect, which, however fascinating to some minds, had little more significance than the equally fascinating skill of a chess player. It was all bogus as the teachings of the churches, which safely promised knowledge after death. In some ways, even more bogus, since one gathered that most of the philosophers did not feel at all sure that there was any after death, and certainly did not know anything about it. No doubt, many people will think all that inconceivably naive. The real question The real questions that man wishes to address to the Sphinx of nature always do seem childish to our academics. From one point of view, we might describe the whole process of academic education as a learning to substitute the unreal and artificial questions of the abstracting for the real and vital questions of the integral psyche. At any rate, it will be clear to academic minds that we ought never to have indulged in these romantic desires for a transcendental knowledge. In the Middle Ages, such Faustian hankerings were thought to involve a wicked relationship with the devil. Nowadays, the Freudians tell us that they are due to an equally wicked intimacy with our mothers. In any case, we are certain to be told that our search is a vain one, since no such knowledge exists or ever has existed. Its existence, in fact, is a childish fantasy, entirely comparable to that of the pot of gold to be found at the foot of the rainbow. Incidentally, there is a pot of gold at the foot of the rainbow, but it is at the far end, and no mere academic has ever reached it. It is not so, however, and those who seek it resolutely enough find it now as in former ages. Porphyry, Porphyry relates in his life of Plotinus how the latter, at the age of 28, sought for it in the lecture room of all the most famous philosophers of Alexandria, at the time the great philosophical center of the Western world. Always he came away from them saddened and discouraged by what he had heard until one day, at the recommendation of a friend, he went to Ammonius Saccas, the god taught. After hearing only one lecture, he recognized that he had found his teacher. The fire of which Plato writes in his epistle quoted earlier flashed in his soul, and exclaiming, "This is the man for whom I was looking." He attached himself to Ammonius and remained his pupil for 11 years. What exactly it was that Ammonius taught is not known to us, as he left no writings, and his pupils were bound to secrecy. But the teachers can be known by the pupil, and if we study Plotinus, we can be certain that what his master taught was no mere intellectual chess play of the sort that he had driven him away from the other teachers, but was one of the many recensions of the deathless knowledge which he sought. Out of discussion, we call to vision to those desiring to see we point the path. Our teaching is a guiding in the way, and seeing must be a very act of him who has made the choice. This is the authentic voice of the inner teaching. About 800 years previously, the Buddha has said exactly the same. By yourself must the effort be made. The Buddhas are only teachers. They who have entered on and tread the inner path are liberated from the enslaving bonds of death. The inner path is literally the path of dhyana, or meditation, but a broader rendering of the term is preferable, as the word meditation means different things to different people. To some, it means a devotional musing on some holy topic. To others, a ruminative process of thought. And to still others, a forcible concentration of mind upon one mental object. In the broadest sense, however, it refers to the sacred voyage up the river of our being to the snowy mountains from which that river takes its rise. There are various means by which that voyage can be made. Some of them suit one temperament and some suit another. But in all cases, the actual voyage is the same. We must leave behind the populous cities where, with their busy life, pass through the jungle tracks, infested with dangerous animals, somehow or other cross the great mountain range and reach the sacred Manas Lake, the source of all the rivers. Thence, if we seek the real source, we must grow wings and follow the swan's path through the upper air. This voyage up the river of life is no mere poetry, but a real voyage. It is the truth which underlies the ancient travels of Heracles, Augeas, and Arjuna, and which inspires from with the arduous pilgrimage still made by millions in the East. It is even the archetype which shines before the inner eye of explorers, an archetype which, through the projection into the physical world, invests with something of its own self luminosity. The sandy caravan routes across deserts and the snowy passes of the mountains so that they shine with the magic glamour. With analytic realism, tries to vain to assure us had no actual existence. But it is not across physical deserts and mountains that the real journey has to be made. As the Buddha has said, where friend, one is neither born, grows old, or dies, neither leaves one sphere of existence, nor is reborn in another, that end of the world, I say, thou art not be able to know, to see, or to arrive at by any walking. But neither do I say, friend, that without having reached that end of the world, there can be any cessation of sorrow. Truly, I tell you that within this fathom long body, with its perceptions and its mind, lies the world, its arising and its ceasing in the way that leads towards its cessation. And we can compare this with the words of Plotinus. This is not a journey for the feet. The feet can only bring us from land to land, nor need you think or coach or ship to carry you away. All this order of things you must set aside and refuse to see. You must close the eyes and call instead upon another vision, which is to be waked within you, a vision, a birthright of all, but which few turn to use. Nevertheless, the real, nevertheless, the way is a real way, and one on which there are landmarks, which may be recognized by all who have treaded. Now, as formerly, the unpashatic seer Vajnavalkya relates the following verses, which were ancient even in his time. The ancient, subtle, and far-leading path has been touched and found by me. By it is the wise knower of the Brahman, liberated from the bonds of earth, traveled upwards to the heavenly worlds. On it, they say, are white and blue, yellow and green and red. This is the path found by Brahma himself. We should note here now Yajnavalkya refers to it as a teaching that had come to him in the form of an ancient traditional verse, and how the unknown writer of the verse refers to it as being still more ancient than him. And yet, to this day, the landmarks remain the same, so that anyone who treads it can recognize the meaning of the cryptic statements about the colors. Many who study mystical literature from outside think that because the descriptions of the path vary, they therefore refer to different paths, and some even make the further inference that they are purely subjective. But no conclusion could be further from the truth. The teachings of all genuine seers are in reality in complete agreement. It is only the verbal descriptions which vary. All descriptions, whether those of ordinary common sense or those of so-called exact science, are symbolic. The words refer to something beyond themselves, something whose nature they can only suggest. There is a story of a small boy who has been given a lesson in elementary astronomy by his teacher, having been told that such and such a star was Sirius, and such another Aldebaran. The boy became thoughtful and asked, "How do we know that those are their names? It is doubtless a truism, but it is one which we too often forget in practice, namely, that words mean only what we have agreed that they shall mean." The work of scientists is seen to refer to a common body of experience because we have hammered out a common terminology. If, instead of being a very general touch with one another, scientists had to work in little independent groups scattered in time and space, each group evolving its own terminology, it would by no means be easy to correlate their researches, though it would always be possible for one who had both sufficient first-hand experiences of science and sufficient patience. Back to this note. The above is said without reference to the theory of mantra and the true name, discussion of which here would be irrelevant and would lead us too far afield. The writings of Seer are in a somewhat similar case to such hypothetical scientific studies. They are the products of isolated individuals or groups of individuals, often quite out of touch with similar groups elsewhere, and each of them has used such terms to describe his experience as were suggested by the tradition with which he was most familiar. The result often appears chaotic, but anyone who cares to follow the path for himself will soon find that the chaos is only apparent, and that the various terms used in any one system are easily translatable into those of another. There will not always be a one-to-one correspondence of the groupings of experiences under one head is also largely a personal matter, whether a given complex of experiences is to be taken as a whole or divided into aspects which are given various names is a matter which will vary with the point of view of each individual experiencer. In the ancient world, such ability to translate from one symbolism into another seems to have been more common than it is at present. We read how Greek priests could visit Egypt or Chaldea and at once recognize a given foreign god as a correspondence of such and such a Greek one. The equation of Thoth with Hermes is a well-known example, but it is by no means unique. It was possible for any initiated priest of the ancient religions to wander, like Apollonius, over the whole world and recognize his own gods wherever he went. The decay of his ability seemed to have been connected with the development, somewhere in the first millennium BC, of the power of abstract thought. Such thought is itself a symbolism, as philosophers are now once more beginning to realize it is a symbolism, and a very powerful one for certain purposes, but it seems to carry with it a fatal tendency to take itself too serious and to pose as being more than symbolism. To say that the world is a product of the union of consciousness with content form is no less symbolic and no more true than to say that it is the marriage of the sun and the moon and the union of the sky god and the earth mother, and to say that the universe is in interrelatedness of atoms as is as definitely symbolic a statement as that it is the morning stars singing together. The trouble arises when, because of their great usefulness in certain fields, we take the former type of statement as something more than it is. We tend to take the description in abstract terms as being actual truth, while we relegate the field of concrete symbolism to poetry. And the art of taking poetry seriously is one which, despite all the poetry which has been written, the West was definitely and almost completely lost. The result of this devaluation of one set of symbols is to render ourselves largely incapable of reading them or of thinking accurately with their help. This is the great misfortune because, while it is true that the abstract symbols employed by modern science and philosophy have a great flexibility and precision, though less of this latter quality than we are apt to think, the concrete ones are infinitely richer in feeling content. And feeling content alone is what can save us from the gray and featureless ghost of blizzard ball atoms. The ability to read and think in terms of concrete symbols is of very great importance, for it prevents that vicious abstraction of all value from experience, which is so marked a feature of the purely scientific world view. We may compare the two to trade by barter and trade by currency. The former is cumbersome and not very exact, but it is always in touch with realities, and is not liable to be upset, as is currency, by sudden political revolutions or artificial manipulations. The symbolism of 5,000 years ago is as valid today as when it was first written, while the abstract symbols of the last century have become almost valueless. Can anyone now read Kelvin or Spencer? The symbols of the archaic world are graven more indelibly than on any granite hillside. They still feel and activate the hearts of men. Those of last century science merely cumber the less accessible shelves of our libraries. From time to time, it is necessary to translate the golden concrete symbols of the ancient writers into the abstract paper currency of modern thought. However, however, is because men no longer wear about their necks substantial gold chains from which they can bite off a link or two to settle their innkeeper's account. They are at home only in the convenient but unstable world of checkbooks. But we must always remember that such translations from the language of eternity into the language of a day are essentially ephemeral. The butterflies of contemporary thoughts come and go in fluttering succession. The archaic eagles soar in the empyrean through unending cycles. Not Christ alone, but every seer can say with truth, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. In particular, the ability to read the concrete symbols is of the utmost importance to one striving to tread the inner path, a path on which feeling and thought have to be fused into a unity. Any one sidedness in this respect results in a tension in the psyche which will prevent harmonious growth and give rise either to a sterile intellectuality masquerading as purely philosophic mysticism, or else to a somewhat infantile emotionalism calling itself devotional religion. In both cases, mystical experience may be gained, but it will be experience of an unbalanced sort which will bear in its very texture the stamp of its inadequacy. One of the most unsatisfactory aspects of scholarly approaches to the subject is this modern ability to read concrete symbols and the conquest over emphasis on words. In his work on Shankara and Eckhart, Otto discusses the question whether the Vedantic Brahman and the Buddhist Nirvana and Eckhart's Godhead are the same or different. But what is different? The words, of course, are different. The groups of ideas referred to by the words are also different, to some extent at least. But that is not the end of the matter. That to which these words refer is neither a word nor an idea, and no one who thinks that it is can possibly come at the root of the matter. There is not there are not half a dozen of these mystical absolutes floating about in the universe. There is not even one true and false several ones. There is just one reality, which has been symbolized in various ways, each symbol expressing more or less inadequately some one particular aspect of it. The real one is men describe it in many ways. Rig Veda. The writings of the seer cannot and must not be read as if they were so many sets of interesting ideas to be judged by their logical coherency. They are descriptions of experience, and the first necessity, if we would understand them, is to realize that their statements refer to something which is neither a word nor an idea. The words of the seer are finger posts pointing to experience, and we shall never understand them aright if we persist in interpreting them according to the method of academic philosophy, which is merely a localization and a drawing of inferences from the experience available to all in normal waking consciousness. The range of the mystic extends far beyond the frontiers of this normal waking world, and only a seer can understand fully the words of another seer. Nevertheless, there is a means by which a partial understanding can be gained, and that is through the intuition of faculty, which is an object of dispute to the learned, an object of cultivation to the wise. Space forbids our entering of any discussion in this faculty. The certainty giving Buddha of Indian teachings, we will only say that it is a power which depends upon the unity of the whole cosmos, upon the fact that any portion of the universe, even the smallest, reflects in its structure the pattern of the whole. The structure of experience levels far beyond our normal range is mirrored in that of this level, and the process of intuition is essentially a reading of what is remote by the contemplation of what is near. This is the meaning of what is known as the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, a universal teaching on the inner path, a key which will open any lock within the cosmos. This axiom is to be found in the teachings of all the mystic schools. Three instances may be given. Neoplastic, all that is yonder is also here. That's Plotinus. Kabbalistic, esoterically, the man below corresponds entirely to the man above, the Zohar. Upanishadic, whatever is here, that also is there. Whatever is there, that again is here. Kathopanishad. And that is the end of chapter 2. Shalom, family.